How can I have fellowship with other Christians if only people knew what I did, if they knew who I was?
We know what a true man looks like because the greatest one lived. Don't play with sin. I would say go to war with sin.
It's like, did he masturbate back in 1900s?
The issue is not that your passions are too great and they're taking advantage of you. The issue is that your passions are too little.
Well, hey guys, today I have got the awesome privilege of having a conversation with a new friend of mine, but someone that you all may be very, very familiar with. Now, he's not going to say this, but I'm going to go out on a limb and call him the OG of Christian YouTube, all right? Before there were all these, I know he's like, okay, I don't know if I want that title or not, but I'm going to give it to him, guys, because what you guys don't realize is that way back in 2014, 2015, before I ever started my YouTube channel, I went on to YouTube and I was trying to find, other Christian YouTubers who were doing things that I was interested in doing or whatnot. And I was like, okay, Lord, there's got to be other people doing this. And one of the first people I met online virtually was Jeff Bethke, or Jefferson Bethke, as some of you may know. And he had lots of viral videos, one of which you might be familiar with, why I hate religion and love Jesus. I think it was something like that. Why I love Jesus but hate religion, something like that, right? And it went viral. I think it's up to 30 million, 40 million views or whatever right now. But he's got a new book out, guys. And look, I get a lot of opportunities to review books and different things like that on my channel. Most of them, I'm not interested. But this one really captured my attention because it focuses on the brothers, the men. It's about what is masculinity. And guys, we need help. We need help. And so we're going to talk about this book. Jeff, welcome to The Beat, man. So glad to have you. Let's jump in a little bit to the content of this book. The name of the book, guys, is Fighting Shadows. All right. We're going to put a link in the description for you to check out this book, and you can order it, or depending upon when you're watching this, you can pre-order it.
Yeah.
But shadow number one that you all list in your book is the shadow of despair. The shadow of despair. So talk to me a little bit about how we as men run to, or how this shadow of despair affects us.
Yeah, this is a big one. Because, and it's why we led with it too, because, psychologists kind of call a category of deaths right now the deaths of despair, and whether that's a drug overdose, alcoholism, and you die from kidney failure liver failure, or all these, or suicide. Like, these are called deaths of despair, and they are like, I'd have to read my footnotes in the book, but it's something like 10 or 15 to 1 compared to females. Meaning there's something, despair is corroding men's hearts and souls to the point of actual death in a really significant way that even health departments and psychologists would call this kind of an epidemic to some level, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually for men. So it's a huge one. And what I talk about and what I try to point to in the book that's really interesting is, we think the opposite of, hope is despair, and it is, but I think it's really helpful to think of despair as not how would I say this? The core of what despair actually is a misplaced hope. That's really important. So what I mean by that is it's not that it's that you hoped in the wrong thing and then you didn't get it. That leads to despair. And I mean your ultimate hope. And that's a really important point because, if you're putting your entire trajectory of your life on the hope of something, and then it doesn't turn out, that leads to a categorical despair. But if it's something that is not at the center of your life and it just, doesn't work out, that would just be called a disappointment. So that you have to make that distinction really clear. And so then what I kind of talk about in the book is you need to go misplaced hope hunting. Meaning you need to look in your life, where are these landmines that if this rug gets pulled out from underneath you, you would probably, wither and die emotionally, mentally, spiritually, etc. And that's really, really important because most men, they have a few of these. And so I talk about a few in that chapter of the misplaced hope of, no earthly suffering. That's a weird one that a lot of Christians kind of have hidden in their heart that they don't realize it. And you know this because if anything goes bad and if anything hurts in life, then all of a sudden you're just undone. You think, oh, this must not be the way. I thought I was following God. Why is life not going very well for me? And it's like, man, I'm not to say that's not categorically extremely difficult to walk through, but God never promises that we won't go through earthly suffering. And so it's like, it's letting these things combat with the actual truth. And the ultimate hope is the thing that anchors you. And it's that we are being made into the image of Jesus. We have a full legacy and a destiny, and we are co-laborers in the kingdom of God. And if that's kind of not that centering point for a man, that you are needed, we absolutely need you in the war, in the battle, and your hope is that you will one day be made like him and live in the new city and the new heavens and the new earth, then yeah, there is probably a misplaced hope in there somewhere. But that's a really, really important one.
Yeah, man, that's huge. And I can say, you know, I don't know how, if you related to this or dealt with this, but I know a little bit of my story is that I didn't get married till I was 40 years old, man, and it was just crazy, the singleness journey. And I'm sure some of the men that are watching this, you're single and you might be on the same path. And I know for me, my misplaced hope for so many years was, man, I fell into the lie that if I can be married, I'll be happy, right?
Yes.
Once I get married, I'll be happy because I'll have someone that I can spend time with. I'll have somebody to fulfill my sexual desires. I'll have somebody that can help be a helpmate in ministry, and I'll have somebody that can help, give me kids and all these things. And while there is, and I'm not going to lie, while there is a huge level of contentment and happiness and joy that I experience in my marriage, I definitely felt a significant amount of despair for many years because I had this hope. And along those same lines is also, financially, for many, many years, I wasn't making that much money. I was teaching high school, which, if you teach high school or whatever, you teach, that's great for you. And that's great. I think it's a noble profession. I did it for 11 years, but I know for me, I had that misplaced hope again that, if only I could make more money, then I'll be happier. Right. And so, man, I definitely think despair is, having that misplaced hope is definitely a huge thing.
100%.
Okay, so the second one, man, this goes along with it, and I think this can create despair, is loneliness. So how do men deal? Well, not how do we deal with it, but how does this particular shadow affect men? Is there an aspect where we as men are responsible for our own loneliness? Because I know many times we kind of keep things in. We don't like community. We don't like to connect with people. We don't want to share. We don't want to be vulnerable like women do. So talk to me a little bit about the shadow of loneliness for men.
Yeah, this one is a big one. I think this one actually is kind of feels like one of the centering chapters of the book. Even we've had over 1,000 people pre-read the book in like a early launch team, and it does seem like just from paying attention that this is the one that is just crushing them in the best sense of the word. Like this one is one of the breadwinner chapters, which is always a fun thing as an author to be like, you don't know, you just write the book, but it seems like this one's doing something special. But I think it's not because of what we wrote. I think it's because of men feel this one so deeply, that they do not have rich, deep relationships and friendships with counterpart men that fill them in a way that feels deeply satisfying for the long periods of their life. And so this one is huge, and there's a couple ways around it. There's a really important book I cite in this chapter called "Lonely at the Top," and it was by I think a journalist or psychologist, but he kind of goes through the data and to show that, like, categorically from a data perspective, men are horribly lonely, and it's really, really, really bad. So like he proves that the problem's really bad. And then two, he kind of comes down on a couple common themes to show why or what happened. But the one that is dominant and why he calls it the book Lonely at the Top is that there's this very, very common trade among Western men that they make in kind of that 25 to 45-year-old range. And what it is that they trade false ambition and success and worldly kind of focus to try to gain all the things they think they want from a performance worldly standpoint and the metrics that they wish they can get and the accolades that they've always wanted their entire life. They trade that for human relationship. It's just simple as that. They don't realize they're doing it because this takes about 10 years to do. But basically, at the cost of human relationships, they attack their work is basically what that trade is, okay? And he says that is like, he proves that is actually one of the main trades men make, but because it's such a slow burn, that is a 10 to 15 year play, that what happens is you wake up when you're 38, you wake up when you're 35, you wake up when you're 44, and you kind of just go, whoa, like I don't have any friends, And when I was 25, I had a lot of friends, and not just like BS friends where you're just hanging out at like whatever. But I mean, like when you were 25, you had like 5, 6 bros that you'd go to war with. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so it's kind of this 20-year play that's like really slow burn that you kind of go like, oh man. And it's not a little too late then, but it's dangerous then is what he says. Like you kind of like, it kind of, you know, takes at least a few years to crawl back on the opposite side. And so, you know, I talk about this, Harvard did this fascinating study where they followed a couple thousand people for life. I mean, from birth. So they started this study in like the 30s, I believe, and they're still running it today. And they just found that basically they tried to just basically measure life. Like what is the whole purpose of why you're here and what are you trying to get and what's a blessing to you and what's good to you. And they essentially found that, man, out of all those people in the study, some made a bunch of money, some made really little money, some were divorced a few times, some stayed married for 50 years, some had a bunch of accolades, some had zero. But what they did find a common denominator among life satisfaction at the end of people's lives, and it actually was how many close relationships they had towards the end of their life dictated their life satisfaction. That was it. And they give a very simple formula that to combat loneliness or to create friendships in a deep way, you need 3 things really, really consistently. You need unplanned interactions, you need proximity, and you need vulnerability. So unplanned interactions. You need you need to make sure that you are not just scheduling all of your relationships to death. Right. Oh, I can fit you in 3 weeks from now at this coffee on Saturday. No. Just go to literally text someone that morning, be like, hey, I'm going surfing. You want to surf? That was totally a Maui reference, by the way. You have to have an element of unplanned interactions consistently for you to have deep, long relationships. Call someone when you're just driving to work, and 9 times out of 10, they might not answer, but that 1 out of 10, you're going to have a great conversation, okay? Proximity. You need to be by people. Like you need to be rubbing shoulders, metaphorically, with other brothers consistently, whether it's at church, whether it's fire nights at your house, whether that's pickleball, whether it's at the weight room. It needs to be consistently proximate. Is that right? Is that a word?
That's
you need
good
to
enough.
Have proximity to other brothers. Yeah. And the last one is vulnerability. When those first 2 are happening, you need to make sure that they actually see you and know you at the full depths of who you are. That doesn't mean you need to have a full crying breakdown every time you see them, but that does mean they need to know the levels at which you operate. You know, there's that hilarious joke. I don't know if it was Nate Bargatze or someone, but there's that comedian where it's like, you know, a guy gets divorced, and you know, the wife sends out this wife and husband over here are like friends with the guy that got divorced and their wife, right? And he sends him out golfing, or the wife sends him out golfing to golf with that guy, and he comes home, and the wife's like, oh, how's Johnny doing? I know he just got divorced. How's he? You know, how's his heart? How's he feeling? How's he thinking? And he's like, oh, I don't know. And he's like, oh, well, what is he? Is he like really struggling right now? Oh, I don't know.
Right.
You know, it's just I don't know to everything. And then he's like, oh, but I do know he got a new driver, he got a new 4-iron, and he just made a bunch of money on this closed deal. And it's like, oh my goodness, you know. So it's a comedic joke, but it is searingly true.
And if the wives
you have to make sure
together,
that you're asking,
they would have gotten all the details.
Exactly, because girls operate like that. Girls do vulnerability really well. It's not saying we need to do it like them, not like we need to do it like them, but we need to recognize that they do know how to create a little bit more lasting web-like relationships than us. And so, yeah, that one's a huge one, and I think guys have to fight that shit out big time.
Yeah, man. That is huge. You know, some of it guys is self-inflicted. Like God has put people in your place. God has put people in your proximity, other brothers. But you know, you have to take the initiative sometimes to reach out and to be intentional about building some of those relationships. And then, like Jeff said, guys, this is so important. Proximity, being around other people. Man, guys, sometimes I go to play pickleball around, and I meet people there. And next thing you know, like we're grabbing coffee, or we're having Bible study together, or we're, you know, going to play golf. Oh, like we play pickleball. Oh, you like to play golf too? Oh, okay, cool, man. Hey, let's go play golf. And then, hey, you like to watch football? Man, let's go to the sports bar and just watching football. Like but that would never happen if we're just like locking ourselves in at home, only spending time with our wife and kids, which is good. And then like this working from home culture is like really isolated so many people to where it's like, you know, we're not good at forming relationships with people. And then, like you said, when we do, guys, I don't know what it is. There's something within us that struggles to be transparent and vulnerable with other dudes. Yeah. It's like I know what part of it is. Part of it is what we're going to get to, number 3, which is shame. Little plug in there for the third one. But it's like there's so much of us guys, and we got to get past this where we like to present this facade that we're perfect, that we have it all together, that we're great husbands, we're perfect husbands, that our kids are perfect, that we're great dads, and we present this beautiful picture with everything we post on social media. It's always perfect. And then we get into relationships with guys, and we have these conversations, and nobody wants to be real. Oh yeah, I'm struggling with porn. Yeah, I'm struggling with lust. I'm struggling with these things. My wife and I just had a fight last night. Like, dude, that's when you open up, man. That's how the true relationships begin to form. So,
100%.
Yeah, I love that. So speaking of that, so number 3, we've talked about despair. We've talked about the shadow of loneliness. Let's talk about the shadow of shame. Man, so many brothers.
It's a big one.
Yeah, that's a huge one. I know that hit me. I don't deal with it as much right now as I did at different points in my life. But guys, this one is huge, and I'll share a little bit later about how that affected me. But talk to me a little bit about the shadow of shame, how that's affecting men.
Now, what is it? To define it really quickly, it's not guilt. Okay, so guilt is I've done bad things. Shame is I am a bad person. So it's internalizing your sin in a way that then makes you isolate, hide, cover, and stay in darkness, which is the tool of the enemy. Now, is that to say that we are not guilty of sin? Of course we are. But the beautiful thing about the gospel is that God never says you are a bad person in that sense, in the categorical sense, right? That it's that he actually sees. It's and another way to think about it is this: shame is, the flip side of that is, because we are totally depraved. Sin is a curse that has broken everything and all things, and there's no coming back from that unless Jesus absolutely heals that. So we can't crawl out of our own hole at all. But another way to think about it is like, if there's a beautiful, gorgeous like cathedral, and it's just, think like, the one standing in Italy nowadays, or the Duomo or whatever, okay, just gorgeous, insanely awesome. There's an awe about that. There's an honor, there's a grandeur, there's a glory, okay? Now imagine if a wrecking ball came in and just completely took that thing down. That would be terrible. But when the ruins are on the ground, has it categorically changed now to like being a deli? Or has it categorically changed to being like a gas station? No. The identity of that cathedral is still a cathedral. It's just a broken cathedral in rubble. Does that make sense? And why that's really, really important is what I mean by that is the categorical identity of you is still that you are a image bearer of God. So that part does not categorically change. But that also doesn't mean that we just, but we need repair and restoration, okay? But that distinction is really, really important, because what shame will do is say you're not. You have gone beyond the line to the point where no one wants you. You're unwanted. You're unloved, and you don't deserve or warrant any level of affection or even grace, right? And so this is really important because, again, guys wrestle with this deeply, right? Whether it's sin that's been done against them, or whether it's sin they've done themselves, whether it's sexual sin, physical sin, mental sin, financial sin, whatever it is like, then what happens is then immediately we feel this darkness in our heart. It covers us, it engulfs us. And then our response is to run and hide or clean ourselves up by ourselves. And that is what Satan wants. That is one of the tactics of the enemy. And so, you have to just sit in Genesis 1, 2, and 3 and read it again and read it again and read it again to get the narrative arc that's going on there, and see that shame is clearly a tool from the enemy that physiologically can enter into your body. That was really interesting when I wrote that chapter, is that it is a real thing that can affect you. People get sick from actual shame. They develop colds. They develop flus. Like it's kind of wild, because we are physiological creatures that when we are believing in certain ways, in our soul and our mind and our spirit, that does actually affect us physiologically. Now, I don't push that too hard, but it is an interesting point. So I just think, men need to make sure that like the God's grace and the cross of Jesus Christ is a nuclear bomb to Satan's shame. Meaning it is so much bigger than the weapon of shame. The weapon of his love and the cross and resurrection is just categorically a nuclear bomb on shame. And you have to let it land like that. You have to let it explode like that. And the only way you can, by the way, is coming in the light. So you have to expose the sin You have to say it out loud. You have to say it to trusted people and to God. And you have to ask for forgiveness. But when you do that, it is wild how there's like literally a dissipation of the same shame. Literally, like it just almost like, I almost think again of like the Avengers movie, you know, what is it? Endgame, when like the 50%, the snap, Thanos snap, and they all just literally just turn into like fuzz and just dust. I literally think that's kind of like what shame is like when it's exposed and kind of put before the cross of Jesus Christ. It just literally just dissipates.
Yeah. That's so true, guys. And I know, you know, some of the other effects of shame is that, you know, it can make you sometimes feel like you're, excuse me, so unworthy, make you feel unworthy. Sometimes it's a block to God, right? Because you feel like, well, man, how can I pray? How can I read my Bible? How can I worship? How can I go to church? How can I have fellowship with other Christians if only people knew what I did, if they knew who I was or who I am or who I think I am? Right? Because I associate with my shame, it can block us from, you know, even serving in ministry. Like, who am I to teach a Bible study? Who am I to lead a small group? Because if people knew who I was or what I've done. And so that shame, it can really, really run deep. And speaking of shame, guys, a lot of our shame as men, comes from this fourth shadow. And that is the shadow of lust. All right. And I, you know, I've talked a lot about it on my channel. I've got all kinds of videos about sexual addiction and different things like that. But this is a huge one for many of us because many of us deal with this issue of shame around the concept of lust. So Jeff, talk to me a little bit about how, and I'm sure you could talk about this one all day just because I've seen some of your stuff and you know, different things that you've addressed with this, but talk to me a little bit about this particular shadow.
I would say, you know, lust is certainly like on the Mount Rushmore of things that kind of kill a guy's legacy and destiny. And it has to be dealt with. And there's part of it that is like our culture's fault, meaning like it's okay to be angry at like Western world of just how enormously unhealthily sexualized it all is. But men also need to take complete responsibility for their own lives and their own sin. And so whether it's porn addiction, sexual addiction, you know, just lust of the mind and the heart, it's a real killer. And, you know, I'll just say one thing on this one. I think the really important thing that actually changed it for me really categorically, you know, 10 years ago or 9 years ago or whatever it was, when I was kind of really wrestling deeply with this. And I know in a lot of my friends' life is, of course, you have to have a full prong approach, right? If you want to actually defeat this sin, it's worthy of having like a 5-faceted approach of radical accountability, radical, you know, kind of cutting off of whatever is necessary that makes it really difficult for you, radical kind of healing from past sin, like all these things. But the one thing I will say that I think is really, really helpful that a lot of people don't talk about in kind of when they talk about this issue is the issue is not that your passions, this is a C.S. Lewis quote pretty much, by the way, that I'm paraphrasing. The issue is not that your passions are too great and they're taking advantage of you. The issue is that your passions are too little, right? That you actually are created for a higher passion and desire and a higher glory. And the passion of lust is elementary. So because what happens is if guys don't understand that, then what they try to do is they try to turn off that part of their brain and their heart and their desires, right? That don't feel anything, don't be sexually aroused, don't have any desire. No, it's like, but you are actually created for that at a higher level. That is such a key distinction. And C.S. Lewis talks about this, that, you know, in all of his stuff on lust and masturbation and stuff which is interesting, by the way, to read someone from like the 1940s and like
right, talking about stuff,
and it
like
just be extremely searing for 2024 Western America.
Did he masturbate back in 1900s?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's wild, man. I don't know. You know, he C.S. Lewis has this really interesting kind of like a picture he uses of like everyone in a theater. You know, I don't know if you know this picture. Everyone's in a theater and there's a stool up front with one of those like food domes over it, you know, that like fancy waiters pull off, right? And there's something on the stool underneath that food dome, but no one knows what it is. And people are like getting really, you know, excited and they're throwing dollar bills on the stage and they're all that. And then it gets lifted and it's like a hamburger and everyone freaks out and throws more money, right? That's literally the image that C.S. Lewis uses. And he basically just says, you realize how weird that would be, right? Like you realize how you would consider that to be that something has happened in those people's hearts that is wildly deformed with their desire and their passion. It's bent in a weird direction that is not healthy and not what they're created for. And he's like, but just because it's so normalized for us to do that with female bodies or to do that with sexualization in general, where you're throwing dollar bills and you're going to movies and you're watching it on Netflix and you're all these different things and it arouses you in a certain way. He's like, just because that's normalized doesn't mean that that's not just as deformed and kind of bent off course. And I think that's a really helpful picture to just realize that, man, like, yeah, that's not what the sexuality is in you as a good and God-given desire, but it's not for that, right? That should be a smoke signal if something's gone wrong. And then just to remind you, yeah, like I've said, that like you have to remember that there's actually, God has greater desires for you. He wants to fulfill your desires in a greater way, in a deeper way. And honestly, I think things like calling, things like this is a thing a lot of men don't talk about. When men are living in their calling and they are feeling deeply fulfilled in like their work, they're feeling deeply fulfilled as a father. They're feeling deeply fulfilled in just like their legacy and destiny that they're carving in the path that they're creating. It is wild how much it then demotes and mutes kind of the false, desire of lust. And it's for exactly the reason we're talking about is when you understand the greater desires, the other ones just completely diminish. And so there's a lot on that one, but that's what I would say.
Yeah. Now that is huge, guys. That is huge. And I really want to piggyback off of what you just said about like, guys, whenever you figure out what your God-given purpose is, like for many years, I knew that my gifts were teaching, but I didn't really know exactly how God was going to use that. But so I was living somewhat of a purposeless life. I mean, I'm not saying I wasn't doing anything for the kingdom, but I just didn't know quite how God was going to use me ultimately. But once I really discovered like, okay, this is what I'm called to do. This is what God has me doing. It's amazing how that can be like a form of accountability. It's like, okay, I can't do this thing. I can't serve these people. I can't speak at these churches. I can't prepare these sermons. I can't write these books if I'm literally struggling with lust all day, every day, right? It's just the two can't coexist in your heart at the same time. And once you start seeing how the one is affecting the other, how the one is stealing from the other, right? It's like, okay, I can't even focus on writing a sermon, or I can't even focus on making a disciple or sharing my faith because my mind is so wrapped up in this lust. Now you start to see this thing eating away at this other area of your life. And the thing I always tell people, because people always ask me, man, Brother Allen, how do you get over this issue of lust? And I'm like, I can give you 12 tips and things like that. But I always say the same thing. When the pain of your sin outweighs the thrill that you get from it, you'll change. That's really at the end of the day, right? Like when you start to internalize and take an inventory of the pain that your sin is bringing to you and how it's affecting your life, your marriage, your finances, your relationships, your ministry, all those things, you start to take an inventory of that and you compare it to the thrill that you're getting over here. Man, when the pain becomes that much greater, man, at some point you'll take those drastic measures and change. All right, guys. So we've gone through 4 of them. We got 3 more to go. Man, I'm having such a great time. We're just kind of cruising along here. So number 5, guys.
These ones will be a little shorter too, because John wrote these ones, so I don't have as much to say. Okay, but I'll add a thought.
No problem. Maybe I'll have John on too, and we'll do something with him. But no doubt. So and obviously, we'll go through. We don't have to go through all of them with the same length, but we'll hit these 3 up. And then we'll talk about some application points and things like that. Ambition, man.
The only thing I would say on there is, what that chapter is really about is you have to be mindful as men that it's kind of the cousin of what we talked about, the loneliness one, or that trade that can happen, but that's basically the same point of there seems to be a large temptation in Western world to make unhealthy, because I want to be clear that there is healthy ambition, and we talk about that in the chapter, unhealthy ambition the goal of a man's life. And if a man has not done the deep work to assess why he does that, why does he sacrifice his family on the altar of work? Why is he sacrificing his kids on the altar of work? Why is he sacrificing his own heart, mind, even his physical body that is unhealthy on the altar of contracts and work and payouts and whatever? Usually it tends to be ambition is related to work, but honestly, it's related to work not because of the work, but because of accolades and success. There's something there. There's some lie they've believed of, if I can just be worldly successful financially or with trophies or with accolades or with awards, then somehow I'm going to be deeply, deeply satisfied. And that's a really unhealthy trade, but a lot of men make that trade. And so we talk about, again, kind of what we just talked about with lust, that holy ambition has to replace unhealthy ambition. And, we do a character study of Nehemiah in that chapter, and what an incredible story of Nehemiah, that he's the perfect example of holy ambition, that he was pushing, he was giving it everything he had. He was giving his legacy and his destiny and his vocation and his work, all 100%, but for the Lord. It was for the glory of God to be displayed and spread throughout the city and throughout the nations, and for others, not for himself. And those are the key distinctions that I think a man has to make.
Yeah. And guys, just real quick before we move on to number 6 is man, guys, I hear this, like, we have to be careful even as men in ministry, because we can really, really easily justify time away from our families, time away from more important things, exercise, working out, walking, doing things like pickleball, golf, things that bring you joy, stuff that's like, that's you, that makes up who you are, hobbies and things like that. Spending time with aging parents and things like these things are very, very important. And it's very easy, guys, for us in ministry, I'm speaking to all my ministers and things, to justify why none of those things can be happening on a regular basis for us, because after all, the Lord's work has got to move on. This book has got to be written. The sermon's got to be written. This small group, this missions trip has got to be taken. I've got to meet with this group of guys or whatever. And it's very easy for us to use that as an excuse to minimize or to deprioritize, if you will, other things that are very important. Number 6 is futility. And then number 7, guys, is apathy. If you want, you could just pick one of those two, or you can kind of combine them or whatnot. But what is the shadow of futility and what's the shadow of apathy all about?
Yeah, these ones have some cousin nature to them for sure as well. But I would say let's talk about apathy. I think this one is, we put apathy at the end of the book for kind of exactly what we've been talking about, where like when men feel, and honestly, there might even be men listening to this, that this is exactly how they feel right now, because they hear all this stuff and they go, I failed. And then our response is either usually shame or apathy. And apathy is kind of like what's the word I'm looking for? A coping device a lot of men use to like just kind of try to dull the destiny in them because of failure. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of men, they and it's just apathy. It's like, oh, I don't care. Oh, whatever. Oh, that doesn't matter. I don't. It's like, and there's a few reasons there. And we talk about this in the chapter. It could be fear of failure. A lot of men, the fear of failure is actually a dominant spirit in their life. It could be the spirit of shame, of like, oh, they failed so much, and the shame feels so great that now they're just going to say, oh, I don't care. And so, but this is a really, really huge one you have to smoke out, because again, a man for the kingdom of God should never be apathetic. And if there's any parts or corners of your heart in which you are, that's probably smoking out something that happened previously that needs to get addressed. And so apathy is kind of a signal that something has gone wrong earlier in the road and needs to be assessed, if that makes sense.
I know you all talked in the book about some common ways that men react to these shadows: overcompensation, shutting down, and or medicating. Do you want to touch on any of those real quick?
A lot of men, you either feel like they need to repress their masculinity, they need to release their masculinity in an unholy way, or the actual right one that a lot of men don't pick is they need to reorient, reframe, and reform their masculinity in the image of Jesus. So it's, repress. I think a lot of men, because of all the cancellation stuff that's happened the last 10 years, all of just like, it's not a super conducive world to being a man right now. Now I know that even that could get me canceled, because people are like, yeah, it's your world you're living in. But, I think just ask men and just be like semi-gentle and kind to understand that I think, yeah, men don't feel it just feels like we're the enemy of everyone right now, or kind of the scapegoat for a lot of the world's problems. Okay. And again, you can disagree with that. I actually don't think it's 100% true anyways. But I think it's certainly how a lot of men feel. Certainly how a lot of men feel. So because of that, one then common temptation is for men to be like, oh, okay, I must repress my masculinity. Like it must be, there's wrong parts of every man on the edges, but just like the shame thing, it's not that being a man is the wrong thing. And so, but a lot of men can feel that way. And so it's just like, put all of that away, put all of my leadership, my courage, my risk, all of those things that I do think make men. Kind of men are saying, oh, it's too volatile of a world. Turn those off. That's a bad solution. The second one would be kind of the Andrew Tate paradigm that he's kind of, and a lot of kind of his followers is like the release it in an unhealthy way. Sleep with as many women as you want, make as much money as you want, have as much success, like do all these things in an unhindered, unfocused, undisciplined way, because that must be the answer. If the world's telling you to repress it, well, then just release it completely without forming it and focusing it in a really deep way. And that's also wrong and unhealthy and really damaging. And so the right answer is, we know what a true man looks like because the greatest one lived 2,000 years ago named Jesus. And so we can just look at him and form ourselves deeply into his image. And so he was the most emotionally healthy human to ever walk the earth. He was the most spiritually healthy human to ever walk the earth. You can go on and on. And so it's like he is our icon, literally, in like the old ancient liturgical sense, that we can look to for ourselves to be formed into the image of. And that's the definition of spiritual formation, fellas. And that's how we defeat all of these shadows, is by consistently placing yourself at the feet of Jesus, where his resurrection power slowly but surely, kind of, for lack of a better term, leaks and permeates onto us and in us, and then through us, through consistent rhythms and disciplines that put yourself in that orbit. Whether like Moses going up to the mountain that Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians, that he was close enough to God for himself to be transformed from one degree of glory to the next. And that's the goal of you as a man, is that you can be transformed. That's a powerful word. You can be transformed from one degree of glory to the next, not one degree, not just one, but to the next glory level and to the next level. And that only happens when you're close enough to Yahweh in the person and work of Jesus to actually be made more and more and more and more into his image, to the point where then your face glows, just like Moses when he comes down the mountain. They couldn't even look at him because his face was glowing so powerfully and palpably. And so this looks like surrounding yourself with brothers consistently. This looks like putting yourself in front of the scriptures consistently. This looks like developing a prayer rhythm consistently. I would say one of the most formative spiritual formation tools in my life has been the power of Sabbath. So just literally having a power of and a rhythm of rest, is massively Yeah, huge. And it forms you in a deep way. And that, by the way, that's one of the best spiritual formation tools for the unholy ambition. Because when you rest and say, I am not that needed for this world to keep spinning and for God to keep doing what he wants to do, it really does something to your heart and your destiny. And so I would say those are huge, huge ones for sure.
We've talked about 7 different shadows, and I know you gave some really, really great practical nuggets and tips of wisdom, just in general, like general things. But Jeff, one of the most common things that I get from a lot of men is dealing with the issue of lust. And I get so many DMs, I get so many comments on my channel about just men dealing with lust, dealing with, sexual addiction and things like that. And if I had to pick, one out of the 7, I would probably pick that one and maybe the ambition one, because there's a lot of men that just like their God is money and their God is success, and all of their pride and their ego and their identity is wrapped up in their job and their work. And, and so that's a whole nother thing right there we could get into maybe another time. But what would your words be? What would you, if you were pastoring guys, if you were equipping guys, discipling guys who are just really struggling in this area of like sexual lust, or maybe even, looking at inappropriate websites and things like that? Like, what would you say to that young man or that man? Yeah.
I think the one I would say too is don't play with sin. I would say go to war with sin. And so war strategy is different than just like babysitting. Do you know what I mean? Like a babysitter is going to look a lot different than a general in a war. And so you got to go to war and cut off the head of the snake, literally and figuratively, with Satan being, the snakehead figure in Genesis. I would say, So because of that, then you have to have a multi-pronged radical approach that I mentioned earlier, but I didn't really break those out. You need to have radical accountability. Okay. So that means you need to have a measurable plan of 2 to 3 guys that are consistently checking in with you once a week, once a day, if it's really serious, and that you have carved out and explicitly said, hey, I need to know that you are the person that the minute I'm feeling something in a really dark and deep way, I can call you and you'll answer at all times for a 6-month period or something like that, right? That hopefully should not last forever. And you should be able to call anyone when something's really deep and bad for the rest of your life. But I'm saying there should be a short phase where it'll be really difficult for a long period of time. For a certain period of time that you need to be able to make that phone call, okay? And then guys checking in you in a certain way. I do think accountability has gone soft a little bit, for lack of a better term, where it kind of just like, oh, we just have accountability groups for like the next 20 years. Right. And it's like, no, like, oh, I failed again. I fell again. No, like it is a serious issue, right? So it's the point of like, if it happens, you confess it. The group then comes up with a radical plan for that to not happen. And maybe that means you quit your job. Maybe that means you don't have an iPhone anymore. Maybe that means you don't have a computer anymore. Maybe that means you cancel your internet. Like these are normal things that need to happen for a period. Just like when someone's training for a marathon, right? They're going to have a different diet. They're going to have a different focus. They're going to have a different week for a year leading up to that point. And then, 5 years from now, they might not have that week. So I would say that like it has to have that spirit. Okay. And I would say radical prayer, getting into prayer consistently and regularly with distractions put away, that you're carving out of just listening to the love of the Lord, listening to his love, soaking in his love. I don't think a lot of men, we talk a lot to God, but we don't just embrace God's warmth of his love and what that does from an actual, again, physiological standpoint of just, man, and again, grounded in the scriptures, but that he loves you, he's for you, he's died for you, you are forgiven, and shame has completely already been dealt with. There's nothing that needs to be done that hasn't already been done on God's side. It's just literally you acknowledging it and confessing it consistently. Radical confession would be another one. So I'd say a couple of those tools have to be massively important. And then, the internet is a tough place. Acknowledge that, it's tough. If you don't have the ability to have a phone in your pocket, then don't have a phone in your pocket. I think that's a totally normal thing. Again, certainly for a period of time that might make your life difficult. That'll help you completely get over the thing. There's a lot of psychological research on lust and the pathways it carves in the brain and stuff like that. And there's this picture that one psychologist uses of it's kind of like this trough that gets dug in your brain every time you look at porn or all the lust and all these things and give into it. And it's like this trough that gets dug, right? And so every time you give in, it kind of is creating, it's like a bulldozer just carving out another inch. And if that's 10 years long, then now you have a 40-foot tunnel, right? That's carved for your neural pathways for that, for both the cue from a habit perspective, the cue, the response, et cetera. And so, he talks about that, like that has to be carved. A new path has to be carved. And that doesn't, I think some guys can get just free radically from the Lord, changing their brain chemistry. But 99% of guys, you got to get your shovel out and carve a new pathway. And guess what? The very first time you do it, it's going to be a few specks of dirt. But if you do that for 10 years, then it's going to be a 40-foot pathway of holiness and grace and turning to the Lord. And so that's really, really important. It's kind of discouraging, but also hopefully encouraging that you just have to do the work. You got to just carve a new pathway and you got to get that bulldozer out and just keep putting that asphalt down, keep making it stronger, keep painting the lines, keep making it stronger. And it really works. When you do that, it consistently uproots the other pathway in a neural way, which is really interesting to think about. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, man, that is so good. Well, man, Jeff, thank you so much, man, for hanging out with me today. And guys, as I mentioned, this is a full circle moment for me, just because I got the utmost respect for Jeff and his wife, Alyssa, for all that they're doing. So tell us a little bit about how people can reach you. Obviously, we're going to put a link in the description, guys. Fighting Shadows. Go pre-order it or order it. Depending upon when you're watching this video. I think it's going to truly bless your life. But beyond the book, tell us, what are some other things that you're passionate about, you're excited about right now that you want our listeners to just dig in? If there's some links you want me to put down below, like what is your wife doing for women? Just tell us all that you got going on right now.
Yeah, if you want to keep in touch with me, Instagram is like where I'm most active. So I kind of see a lot of the stuff there and comments and hang out there a lot more. That's Jefferson Bethke on Instagram. And then, probably website, formingmen.com would be like where the dominant kind of anything resonated with you today. There's probably a resource on there. Come hang out with us at a retreat. Come to a conference of ours. There's a lot of resources on there. I'm really excited about, we're launching a new program. We haven't talked about this yet, so I don't even know if it'll be online yet, but you can just pay attention. We're launching a new program called Man Year. I'm really excited for this. I think this is going to be, to some degree, a national movement if we can get enough momentum behind it. But it's going to be, this premise that men are not there's four prongs. Men are not emotionally healthy, spiritually healthy, physically healthy, and mentally healthy. And Man Year is taking one quarter for a year to address each of those based on a challenge. And so you get to choose your challenge. There's like 5 challenges you get to choose from on each bucket. But you know, if it's spiritual, then you have to memorize, you know, an epistle in 12 weeks. You know what I mean? Like it's hard stuff. If it's physical, you got to run 10 miles at the end of 12 weeks. Like some of these other things. And you can't sign up for the group unless you bring 2 other brothers to the table in your local place and do it with them. And and literally, like, the software will cancel you out if you try to sign up by yourself. So I'm really excited for that. There's a lot more to it, but that's coming, and I think it's going to serve a lot of men.
Hey, man, that is awesome. That is awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for your time, Jeff, and thank you guys for watching this video. And once again, go connect with Jeff if you haven't connected already. Stay tuned for all the things that he is doing along with his wife. I'm sure there's mostly men watching this. Maybe there's some women watching this who are trying to watch it to share with their husbands. That's probably a good thing. Man, Jeff, thanks so much for your time, man. And it's good to get to know you, man. And God's blessings to you, man. Thanks for being here.
Dude, this was a blast, man. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thanks.